We had several families who left simply because they lost authorization to work. They couldn't provide for themselves. They were stressed about being detained. It just not very easy situation. But a lot of people have no place to go. They don't have finances to travel. And Ukraine is still in a war. And they live in every single day in very stressful situations here simply because they don't know what's going to be tomorrow. That's why I am approaching our congressional delegation now to expedite the cases. So we're not going to run into disaster because they can only live for so long on their savings. They becoming a victim of some predatory practices in the workforce. And bottom line, we don't want them to be on the streets because they don't have a place to live.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is the Executive Director of Project Alaska, Tetyana Robbins. Project Alaska is an organization that helps Ukrainian refugees find meaningful employment in Alaska. From helping improve English language skills to navigating the American immigration system to helping with certifications and even with transportation to job sites, Project Alaska does everything it can to make sure Ukrainians fleeing their war-torn country can quickly achieve self-sufficiency. Tetyana immigrated to Anchorage herself from Kharkiv, Ukraine over 20 years ago when she married her husband, Mike. With her master's in accounting and auditing, she was a natural fit for her husband's business ventures where she tracked the finances and kept the books. When war broke out in her home country in 2022, she and her husband founded the Ukraine Relief Program, which helped Ukrainians get to Alaska, contributing to one of the biggest waves of foreign resettlement our state has ever seen. Now, as the legal status of those recent refugees is called into question, she is advocating the federal government to find a path to citizenship for the 2,000 plus Ukrainians who are vital to our workforce. Tetyana Robbins, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Representative Gray. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Kharkiv, Ukraine. This is the second largest city in Ukraine, which is right on the borders with Russia. Like about 40 minutes from a city and you cross of the borders in Russia.
What was your childhood like?
That was a Soviet time. My mother worked in a factory in the management. And actually, my father was an engineer inventor. He was working in a big factory which was producing tanks. It was like a military factory. So he was actually inventing different engines. And both parents were professionals. And my mom's side, they had a farm, which was actually right across of the borders.
In Russia?
In Russia. Yeah. So I would go there a lot, being with grandma, helping on the farm. And same thing with my father. He was just on the other side of, it's a city called Sumy, which also right now under a lot of bombing because it's closer to borders with Belarus.
And I've read a couple of your bios online. One of them said that your first language is Russian. Is it because your mother was a Russian speaker because her family was from Russia?
Not necessarily, because the city is east of Ukraine.
Got
and
it.
Majority of people on east of Ukraine, especially close to the borders, that's a Russian language is main language. In even south of Ukraine, Russian language was the main. Even on my father's side, everybody spoke Russian. But when I was at school in Soviet time, we studied Ukrainian. That was a part of the curriculum. And also we studied English. It was part of the curriculum. So it was 3 languages.
Did you think your schooling was good?
Oh, I think it was very good. It actually was a great system. We didn't have a high school, so we didn't have a middle school. So it would be one big school. We would have elementary, let's say, and the lower floors, like would be first and second floor, would be elementary school. And then it would be middle school and high school. So when I moved to America, the fact that we have a separation between elementary and middle school and high school was a very different thing for me.
Growing up in Soviet times, religion was against the law? Was it like there's no religion in the Soviet Union?
The one religion was a Russian Orthodox, but even it was allowed, it still wasn't, I would say, very active. So people still were very quietly going to churches. So it would be really hard for you to be an activist. And for me, I'm actually a product of American missionary work. Because after perestroika, we started having Protestant churches, which is back then and during the Soviet times, they were underground churches because at least they were tolerating Russian Orthodox, but anything else beside that was not good.
So when the Protestant churches came in as missionaries, you started attending?
Yes. I started attending, and that's how I joined the church, but it was set up by American missionaries. I remember that was a pretty interesting time after perestroika because the country fell apart. All the way of living what my parents used to live and have all of that consistency of what was going on completely went away. For me, it was easier because I was about 16, 17, so I was entering my adult life. So anything was new and exciting. But when I look back, that was crazy what country went through and how factories stopped and how economically it's all changed. But meanwhile, we started having different denominations, which was allowed.
Did your parents go to the Protestant church with you, or did they support you?
Actually, when I went to Protestant church, my parents were very stressed about it because that was a new thing. And I was adult at that time, so it was my choice to join that church. And yes, my mom was concerned, but years later, actually, when I was already immigrated to America, she joined the same church. So
it just took her a little longer.
Yeah, it took her a little longer.
I lived in Estonia for a few years in former Soviet country. And one of the most depressing things to talk about was the older people who had retired immediately after perestroika because their pensions were really worthless because of so much inflation and just the change of way things were.
Yes.
So it was like people who had been middle class were suddenly very poor.
Yes.
And many of them were maybe too old to get a job in the new system.
It's exactly what's happened to my mom. She was in management of a big factory, and suddenly the factory stopped working. And all of your life, you were working in the same system, doing the same stuff. That was very different. And she started working for a private company. Luckily, she was able to adopt. And she worked for a private company, but it was so new to her, just the whole thing of private business, how it's ran and how it works. And personally, I think I always said that Ukraine or any post-Soviet republic, one of the 15 republics, it was 15 republics under the Soviet Union, it felt like they opened a door and a flood of capitalism came into the country. And nobody had mentally understanding, and there were no rules. I would say it was Wild West then, because even I think a relation between employer and employees, like here we have a lot of really good rules and where we know how things should be. Then nobody had any training and any understanding how it's going to work. It's very different. I remember during the Obama time when they were talking about start to have relationships with Cuba. And I'm like, oh my gosh, poor Cubans. Because when capitalism walk in and there is no training and no understanding how run the business, what would be ethically right. And people had to figure it out. When I got to college, we were studying management, marketing, and banking, I remember, and we didn't have books. So it would be a professor who would give us a lecture. We would have to write it down. And that's pretty much it. Because there was no system for that. Marketing didn't exist. And banking was only one bank, central bank. So it took some time. And I think they still, when I used to go back to Ukraine, I still was looking, they're still not there compared to where we are here.
And did your dad die when you were young?
No, he didn't die when I was young, but he died young enough. I was still a young adult when he passed away. Yes. And my mom immigrated here in 2014 because when war started in Ukraine in 2014, then she was too close to the borders. And I was suspecting that eventually it's not going to be good because then they had the tanks and outskirts of the city. And it was just...
You could see the writing on the wall.
Yes, I knew it's sooner or later something going to happen. And at that time, I was already here for a decade.
Was it easy to bring her over at that time?
I don't know how to say it easy. We filed her paperwork for a green card, but I think it took at least 9 months. So one of the issues is even it's eligible relationship for green card, which is parent is eligible to receive a green card. The problem is the system, it takes forever to process the paperwork. And so we had to wait for quite a good time before that's what turned into a real green card.
Bouncing back to growing up in Eastern Ukraine, having grandparents on the Russian side of the border and really traveling back and forth. And at the time when you were a little girl, it being really one country, like not being a big deal. One of the arguments that Russia has made is that the eastern part of Ukraine is more Russian than Ukrainian. And I'm just curious from your perspective, like, what's your feeling about that?
It's really hard for me to make observation because, first of all, I've been living here since 2004. Lots of things happened in the last 20 years in how country was developing. And I'm talking specifically about Ukraine. Right when I was immigrating, Ukrainian language was implemented to be a main language in schools. So if before that, it was Russian and then Ukrainian was secondary, it became a Ukrainian first, primary, yes. And so that's itself. So all legal paperwork, everything was already in Ukraine.
Was it difficult to make that transition?
For me, since I grew up in a different school, got a different education and everything, it was difficult. But again, I cannot really say much about that because I left when they started implementing it. So in my case, it's hard to say. And also, last time I visited Ukraine, it was 2013, right before that the first wave of war happened. And it definitely changed. People had more national pride.
So by making the Ukrainian language primary, people identified more as Ukrainians.
Yes. And also, like right now, I have several employees in our nonprofit, and one of them from Ukraine, much younger, she immigrated here, I think, in 2019. So she went through a different schooling than I did. And they, even in the school curriculum, there was a lot of implementation of Ukrainian writers, Ukrainian literature, and stuff like that. And I also feel like it's not about like ethnically whether you're Ukrainian or not, but you live in this territory and you have your pride of your country. I think that's what happened, that the people who live on this territory, where they're on east of Ukraine, where they primarily spoke Russian, they still feel themselves as Ukrainian citizens because this is territory where Ukrainians, they have their flags, they have their own constitution and everything. So it's not necessarily about like influence of Russia, like how close you to the borders. And it's more about that they have their own way of living, their own customs, and the language. When Ukrainians arrived here in 2022, they spoke Ukrainian. They chose to speak Ukrainian. Even they all know Russian. And I could see that the part of that they were trying to show, we have our own country, we have our own language, and we would like to have our sovereignty.
Bouncing back to you, you joined the Protestant church with the missionaries, and I assume that in some way led to you moving to America.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay, well, then teach me what happened.
We just met online. Me and my husband, we met online. And
back in the early 2000s.
Yes. And he traveled to Ukraine and we dated, we met in Ukraine. And then when we decided to get married, our wedding was at that church.
Oh, in Ukraine?
In Ukraine. Our wedding in Kharkiv. Yes, we got married in Kharkiv. And then I immigrated here. It was a little bit crazy. You're thinking that I never been in Alaska. All of our relationship was in Ukraine. And traveling to Alaska without never visiting Alaska was a little bit scary. But even now, then it would be really hard to get a tourist visa. It's a lot of trouble. So I think I was very brave.
Yes, you were. Did he speak any Russian or Ukrainian or?
No, he learned some keyword, I would say.
But it was all in English.
It was English, yeah. And I spoke English. English taught at Soviet schools. And also I made a point to study it more. So when we met, I spoke English.
And when you arrived in 2004, what was your impressions? Did you think you made the right decision or did you think, oh no, what is this?
Actually, I arrived in January, like around January 11th. And it was all snowy and it was evening. And I remember my first morning, I wake up and I look at the clock at 7 o'clock and it's dark. It's 8 o'clock, it's dark. At 9 o'clock, it's dark. And I look at my husband and I said, so I guess it's a polar night. And he said, no, just wait until 10 a.m. So I think that was the biggest shock. And actually, Vegetation here reminds me of Ukraine a lot. So we're saying birch trees. And that was probably the biggest challenge for me, just to accept the fact that it's quite dark. But in general, I fell in love with Alaska right away. The beauty. And as I was living here, and then we own our business. And I remember when we hire someone to bring from down the States, one thing I learned, you either love Alaska or you hate Alaska. There's no middle feeling, And that's how it was for me. I was like, oh my gosh, I love it.
And did you start working in business right away?
Yeah, pretty quick. Obviously, it takes some time to adjust and, get your driver's license. I arrived in January. I think by fall, I was already involved in my husband's business.
What was the business?
At that time, it was actually a group of radio stations my husband owned and also a marketing agency. And I am, by trade, I'm accountant. I'm actually auditor. And so my skills to being just a bookkeeper to begin with was pretty handy. And then management and HR. And because at some point, our company was like close to 40 employees and we had 7 radio stations. It was a lot of work.
And did you have children right away when you got here?
I came with my son, Daniel, and he was 6 at that time. And then we had a baby Elizabeth a few years later. And Mike had his daughter. So we had 3 kids.
And then when your mom came over in 2014.
That was great.
Yeah.
That's actually, mom was a wonderful addition to our family. Kids got a built-in grandparent who is spoiling them. And we got a built-in mom who's spoiling and still does.
And I know you spoke Russian with your son. Did you make sure that your daughter spoke Russian as well?
It's a little bit challenging when you live in here. And I wish my mom would come sooner when my youngest was born, because yes, I spoke Russian to them. They had a nanny because I was working all the time. So I had to have a help with a child. And I had one which was speaking German.
Oh.
And I had the one who spoke Russian, and I had one who spoke English. So my child actually was a little bit confused which language to speak. And her language was Russian. And of course, then she picked English prevails, I would say.
So you were right by getting your mom out, and flash forwarding to when the Ukrainian war, the most recent one, started. How quickly did you become involved in helping Ukrainians get out?
Pretty quick, because I had relatives in Kharkiv. And I had my nephew who lived in Bucha. Maybe you might hear that. Yes, he was in that place. And actually, when we heard the news, I was at Bible study. And we started receiving text messages from our relatives that bombing started. And it was evening. It was like 7 p.m. or something. And Ukraine is 13 hours ahead.
2020?
2022.
2022.
Yes. And so I immediately was like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Just trying to reach to my family. Nobody would answer. I didn't sleep whole night. And in the morning, I was trying to reach him again. And I remember a text message I sent to my husband saying, hey, I think I lost all of my family. I think it's probably the most horrible thing I have had in my life in terms of that silence, not knowing what's going on. And just like this is just a sad process of thinking in that like, I might lost all of my family. And then suddenly I received a text message from my nephew who said, hey, I just crossed the borders through Poland. And I was like, hallelujah, because he had a 2-year-old son with him and his wife. And journey started right there because a lot of people then were able to escape. And
this was the nephew from Bucha?
Yes.
Just for listeners to understand, Bucha was famous in a very bad way because they murdered the city.
Yes, that was really bad. And they had a son who went through the very serious surgery. And if you remember in 2022, Putin, I think they were on the borders with Russia for about a month, kind of warning them that we're going to
like building up.
Yeah, it was building up. And so my family, my nephews, they were thinking about like moving a little bit away, maybe deeper into Ukraine, maybe the west of Ukraine, but they couldn't travel because their son just went through the surgery and they just couldn't travel. So day before war, the doctor cleared him for travel. And so they had everything ready. So they had everything packed in their car, just prepared. And so in the morning when bombing started, they were just able to jump in a car and just go. And that's only, if they would delay a little bit, they probably wouldn't be able to cross the borders. That wouldn't happen at that point. And I remember like when my nephew said that when they were approaching the border, he says, I felt like I'm driving 30 minutes ahead bombing because every single city I would go through about 20, 30 minutes on the radio, they would say they're bombing. I just can only imagine the experience when you're running for your life. And then they ended up in Poland, and I found the friends in Poland who were able to host them so they wouldn't have to stay in refugee camps. When I start thinking, oh my goodness, we have a lot of Ukrainian people here in Alaska. They're probably in the same boat. Their relatives in refugee camps. We need to do something. And that's how the effort it was immediate. Because think about the war started in February, and already the first arrivals of Ukrainians were here May 21st, 2022.
And was your nephew and his family some of the first people you brought over?
Yes, that was the first plane, for sure. And the journey started because we hosted them in our own house. They stayed with us until they were able to rent their own house and get their jobs. And even when they arrived, and they still had to wait. I think it was about 3 months wait before they were able to get a social security, which would allow them to work, which was another hurdle there for them. Luckily, it's all behind.
Right. So they're doing well?
They're doing well. My nephew works as an engineer at one of the native corporations. And his wife was working at a hospital as an accountant. But they just got a newborn baby.
Cool.
So she's right now taking care of the baby, but he still works as engineer at the native corporation.
And did some of your family stay in Ukraine, or did they all come over?
No, I have a family in Ukraine. I still have a family. My nephew's mom and his dad, they still stay in Kharkiv. She's a medical professional, and they just chose to stay there and help. And it's hard. We hear every day that city being bombed every single day. But I respect their choice to fight for their country.
How has your mother processed all of this?
This is pretty difficult thing for us. And on top of it, the village where my mom initially from, on the Russian side, it is so close to the border that the fighting when it's going there, it goes both ways. That whole village was evacuated by Russian government, and they lost everything. They became refugees also. They took them to nearby city, and that village doesn't exist. So the cemetery where my grandmas and grandpas buried, and that place doesn't exist anymore. So you lost the place where you're from completely. And so for my mom, it's hard because we have relatives on each side of the borders and both sides of refugees, which is unheard of. I never, in my wildest dream, I would never think about something like that because people are friends. It's just like hard to imagine even that something like that would happen.
So you started Project Alaska pretty soon after you were bringing the planes over?
Yes, when we brought the planes over, first it was like a rescue operation because people need to have resettlement, like their basic needs have to be fulfilled. And housing, we worked with Alaska Housing to make sure that they can be resettled. And that was all great until I realized that, yes, there is a great system for resettlement for just generic stuff, for basic stuff. But Ukrainians, they're not your typical refugees. They came from Europe with a very high-skilled, very educated, and just to put them in an entry-level job seemed to be like just a waste of their skills. And our state didn't have any system for help for high-skilled refugees. And on top of it, our state never hosted large amount of refugees to begin with. I think the largest number ever they had in a year would be 50. We had like over 2,000 came out here. And so that was immediately very obvious to me that there is something needs to be done. And in January 2023, we started Project Alaska, specifically with a goal to create a system to help our Ukrainian refugees with trade and career development.
And Ukrainians were humanitarian parolee status. Was that the title, like the type of refugee that they were? I get a little bit confused about all of this.
So I will explain. Yes, a general amount of Ukrainians came on humanitarian parole, which is temporary status. Like
emergency status.
Yeah, emergency status, which initially was granted for 2 years because nobody thought that Ukraine gonna be so long in the war. And people were coming in waves. So it was not like in May, everybody came. They were coming every day in the course of years. And so when you approach in your 2 years, you were allowed to re-parole for another 2 years. but that status does not have path to permanent residency. But someone comes on a true refugee status, in the course of their first year here in the country, they can apply for green card. So for Ukrainians on that humanitarian parole, there is no pathway to get a permanent status. And on top of it, Alaska is very unique than the other states because historically our fisheries would hire a lot of Ukrainians and bring them on J1 visas, like on the work visas. And then the moment when the war started, lots of our fisheries had a lot of Ukrainians working on the boats, an occupant, for example. And of course, all of those men was pretty stressed about their wives and kids. And a lot of fisheries helped them to adjust their status to temporary protected status. And based on that status, they were able to become sponsors for their wives and kids who became humanitarian parolees. So we have a lot of families, mixed families. So that's why TPS, temporary protected status, as important as humanitarian parole. It just, with TPS, it's different. They reapply every year. You have to. With humanitarian parole, it's every 2 years. And right now, people were allowed to reapply for a parole for another 2 years. But for that first group, the 2 years is going to expire in May next year. And so far, we do not have any word as they allowed to reapply or not.
And so that's what you've been working with Senator Dan Sullivan's office and the whole delegation is to try to find a pathway towards making sure that people who have been working can continue to work.
Well, the main goal will be a pathway for Ukrainians for some permanent status. Because I think for anyone who moved here, let's say in the May of 2022, next year is going to be 4 years they're living on the territory of U.S. And it's a long time. And their kids are going to school, the kids getting born, they got their jobs, they pay taxes.
And if their village was completely evacuated and there's 0 people living there, the chances that that would be a place that you could go back to and restart your life in the very near future is very slim.
Very slim. And some areas are occupied by Russians. So
you wouldn't be welcome back
You wouldn't
anyway.
be able to welcome back. So technically, if you would have even go back to Ukraine, you would have to start from 0. And there is still no chance that war will not start again. It just that everybody wants to have their peace. And the people who chose to leave, they had something in mind. I'm done. I want a peace for my children. Like me, I'm so happy that my nephew's son haven't heard any of that bombing. They will run away pretty quick, that he sleeps and wake up every day. And he's a cute American boy now, speaks English, forgetting his Russian, unfortunately. Enjoying his life, not thinking about any of that. And same thing like for all of the other families. But right now, this is our long-term goal to be able to help Ukrainians to get some kind of a permanent status. But immediate need, people applied for a reparole and they can apply it as early as within 6 months of expiration. And unfortunately, their cases got stuck.
There was just like a complete pause on processing.
There's a pause, and I don't know what's going on with the process, why it's slow. I don't know. But meanwhile, the expiration days comes and they're losing their authorization to work. So basically, you have this self-sufficient person who takes care of the family, pays their rent, not relying on the system or anything.
Exactly the type of people that we want.
Yes, has a job and everything is fine. And suddenly he can't work, which means his employer had to let him go. And then they cannot pay for their rent and food and car insurance and everything else. This is just a not very good situation. It's very critical for them to have a right to work. And I got a lot of the calls from employers because they
want to keep them.
Yeah, they value their workers and they're important to them and they don't want to lose them. And that's what prompted me to push for advocacy. Okay, we need to figure out something because in Alaska, we're shorting for workforce. We want to have people with good qualifications and good skills and good education. And especially since we last 3 years, my organization, along with the other ones, we spent so much time placing them for work, retraining them. Recertification takes forever. We got their diplomas evaluated. We've done so much good work. And now after you've done it like 3 years and employer called you, like, I love that worker. I want to keep this person, but I don't know what to do.
I think the uncertainty, in some ways, the most stressful.
Yes.
Just a few days ago, through your advocacy, you got Senator Sullivan and Murkowski and Congressman Begich to send a joint letter to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, urging the administration to extend and preserve the protections for the Ukrainians in Alaska.
Yes.
I'm just going to say it out loud. Because your husband's involved in Republican politics, you have these connections, particularly Congressman Begich and Senator Sullivan are allies with President Trump. Like, there's a pathway here that maybe the Secretary Noem will hear it and will be willing to do something.
I hope so. But I would like to say that Senator Sullivan, I've been talking to both offices of Senator Sullivan and Congressman Begich since the beginning of the year. And their staff were very attentive. They were always very helpful. And right now we're working specifically with the Senator Sullivan's office for Ukrainians whose authorization to work about to expire or already expired. So we're preparing the case for them to push it through USCIS to expedite process. Think about the fact that every case accompanied with a personal letter.
Yeah.
And when you read those letters, here's a single mother who is working 2 jobs and she lost authorization to work and she cannot provide for her child. And all she asks, can I work? Can I make money? Can I pay taxes? Can I live my life? And I'm very proud of our congressional delegation. And Senator Murkowski always was very supportive. Just this last May, we went to Delta Junction together. And she visited with Ukrainians in Delta Junctions. They have 4 acres of land and they grow potatoes there. And the first year, they grew 20 tons and they delivered potatoes to all the food banks of Alaska. So they giving back to community. So she gone to Delta Junction all the way deep into that village and we stayed by that field and talked about it. And our delegation is very attentive to that. And first of all, we welcome people here. And I think when we did that whole rescue operation of bringing people here, it touched so many people. It doesn't matter what party they belong. We had different people from different backgrounds who either donating some goods, donating money, sponsoring people, hosting people. Some of them hired people. It's touched so many our residents because if you will go to Matsu, which we have a pretty high population in Matsu, and everybody's saying, Mayor Vasila says, oh my gosh, it's the best people, best workers. We're going to Delta Junction, which we know that was highest concentration of Ukrainians per capita in the whole entire country. The community says, yeah, we will write letters, we'll support, we like kids, we like people. And same everywhere in Alaska. And I think this is a very promising situation that our congressional delegation is united. And
I ran into Issa Spatrasano at an event a few days ago, and she is the former refugee coordinator for the state of Alaska. Not anymore, but she still has connections with the refugees. And something that she said, that this uncertainty that is so stressful. And when people are watching what's happening with ICE, detaining people without asking questions, that there are people who are choosing to leave, who are saying, like, you know what, this is not what I signed up for, and are leaving. They're not being deported. They're choosing to look for another country or to go back to their home country because they feel that this is too stressful. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yes. And we had several families who left simply because they lost authorization to work. They couldn't provide for themselves. They were stressed about being detained. It just not very easy situation. But a lot of people have no place to go. They don't have finances to travel. They don't have finances to sustain somewhere in the other country. And Ukraine is still in a war. And they live in every single day in very stressful situations here simply because they don't know what's going to be tomorrow. And that defeats the whole purpose, like, of our nonprofit with career integration. When you have to make a decision of invest some time into retraining, you're thinking like, why should I do it? Because maybe I will have to leave. And it's been actually working with ISA. We all agreed that it probably was the hardest group of refugees we had to deal with simply because when people come in on a regular refugee visa, they already know they're here permanently and they're applying for green card. So all of the training on all of the help we're providing. They just gladly taking it and they looking forward to life and everything. Whereas with Ukrainians, it was hard because they just didn't know from a day one what they're going to do. And even like when the first group arrived, when initially we had only 2 years for humanitarian parole, they saw that they may not be able to stay here past years. And we had to wait until almost like 3 months before everything's going to expire. And before they were able to re-parole, they just didn't know. And I prayed that the same thing will be with that first group next year. That's why I am approaching our congressional delegation now. And I hope that they will be able to make some kind of adjustments sooner than later. People will have peace. Because in my opinion, people who for some reason didn't like it to be here in Alaska or in America, we have our way of life here. We have our culture, and if someone just couldn't fit in, it's possible they will leave. But there is almost 100% of people here who want to be here, who likes our culture, who likes our lifestyle and everything what America has to offer.
This is a difficult question, but let's say that you're a Ukrainian immigrant and you've lost your right to work because your parolee status expired and it hasn't been renewed. And let's say they don't have a lot of money. Like, how are they going to leave? How are they going to afford to go to another country? What do they do? What are they supposed to do all day long?
That's why we're working really hard with the Senator Sullivan office to expedite the cases, which is expired or close to expiration. So we're not going to run into disaster because they can only leave for so long on their savings. They becoming a victim of some predatory practices in the workforce, and it's just not going to be good. And bottom line, we don't want them to be on the streets because they don't have a place to live and don't have a place to go. All of the activity which our organization does right now to address those immediate concerns, immediate needs with cases which are pending, expired, to make sure that the family is being taken care of in this regards, with the hope that the long-term solution is give them a permanent pass.
If people are listening to this right now and say, I want to help, what can they do?
They can call me. They can go to our website and reach out. It's www.projectalaska.com. And you can fill out a contact form and we will connect with them. And that's how it's happening right now. Between our employers who calling us and word of mouth and people finding us and even Catholic Social Services, we're working with them. So they referring people if they are stuck on their cases. That's all we can do at this point. And I actually have right now a huge group of people in Kodiak. The same thing. They lost the authorization to work. They were working on a boat. And the boat was providing the housing. And once they lost authorization to work, they lost everything, including housing. And it's really hard to rent anything
when you
without
have no proof of income.
Yes. Think about this. And it's in Kodiak. And it's a large group of people. We're right now helping them with their cases. That's, for me, is the biggest concern. If they here, let them work. Because they self-sufficient. They not in the system, and actually they are contributing, they're paying taxes, and why not?
So I interviewed Margaret Stock recently for the podcast. She's an immigration attorney.
She's a wonderful attorney.
And she talked about how she got into immigration work over 30 years ago when she took on a case, and she saw through working through that case how broken the immigration system was and how unfair it was to her client. And then I said, it seems like 30 years later, we haven't improved. She said, no, it is much worse. It is much more difficult to figure out how to help someone navigate through this broken system. And I don't know. I think all we can hope is that maybe it's so broken that people have to see it, have to see that we must fix this.
I hope it will go under reform, maybe some kind of a new reform. It looks like everything is under reform right now. In fact, our resettlement now is moved to the state jurisdiction. The resettlement of refugees is going under the state, under Department of Labor.
And I know from talking to Issa that most states do that.
Yes.
That Alaska was unusual by basically having Catholic Social Services be the organization to do refugee resettlement for the whole state. But I'm sure that it's not going to be an easy transition.
I'm hopeful. Nobody likes change. obviously, Catholic Social Services was very well organized because they've done it for the last, 30 years. And it was great. And of course, when suddenly you change in something, you immediately feel like nobody likes change. But at the same time, I'm hopeful, like all of their challenges, which we had with immigration and refugees, and it's going to be under the state, which is closer to you.
Right. It is.
Rev Dre.
It is.
So
but I just worry about Department of Labor because I work on other issues with the Department of Labor. And I sometimes feel that they are understaffed already. Are we going to invest enough to make sure that we have the people that will be necessary to make this program work?
Hope so. Through my organization, I work very close with, actually last 3 years, like Department of Labor was the best partner in my work. And our current commissioner of Department of Labor, Cassie Munoz, is a great partner. So every time we would run into issue, I would reach out to her and she always would make it happen. So in general, that department being very helpful. Like I had a project when we started diploma evaluation and Department of Labor was on board from day one. And job centers. I know it will be different than running the job centers. It's more social work. And I hope they will figure out the structure and way and is it issue grants or it will be inside of the Department of Labor because they're going to get funding for the hiring people and stuff. And they've been working with us in such a close relationship. So they're very respectful of our expertise. And they understand that it has to be done in depth as human life we're dealing with. And I hope that they will be able to put in good system. It's probably not going to be perfect from day one, I'm pretty sure. But at this point, the way I look at that, we have a very small flow of refugees coming into country. So if you want to change something right now, probably a good time because we don't have a lot of people coming in. They will start with a very small numbers. And it will progress.
I appreciate your optimism because you're optimistic. I will try to be optimistic.
And also working with our congressional delegation, they are not looking into those little things every day. But it is bipartisan support. And for me, it doesn't matter what side you are in politically. We're all humans. And when I come and say, hey, people struggling, it touches hearts right away. How can I help? The first question. And I think with the right amount of education, it will be pushed further. And so right now, I'm organizing a group of our employers who hired Ukrainians who are signing a petition that, again, to our delegations, hey, we would like to meet with you and discuss that. We want to keep them here. What can we figure out? And I cannot speak for the other states because I'm not living there. I don't know what kind of situation going on, but I know here we need people. And we need hardworking people. And we need people who can integrate in our communities easily. And Ukrainians proved it. We didn't have any problems in the last 3 years. Everywhere I go, everybody has some Ukrainian friend. And our kids are in school and becoming friends with everyone. And so it's been a very smooth integration. And we would like to keep it this way.
Tetyana Robbins, thank you so much for being on the show today. I appreciate your time and I appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-269-0123.